Apollo 11 was filled with vivid experiences. One that comes to mind in my case is the flying through the moon shadow and seeing the sun eclipsed by the moon as we approached it. That was a very spectacular sight.
Well, I think the thing I remember most visually is the ascent stage of the lunar module, the ascent stage of Eagle, in front of my window, and then in the background seeing the lunar horizon and seeing the Earth pop up above it, so that you had the horizon, the lunar module, and the Earth all in a row. I thought that was something that would rarely be seen again, and I remember that most vividly.
I think for me the most memorable time may not have been one that the happening I was most aware of, but I've had occasion to challenge my memory and think back of those first few seconds when Neil and I touched down, and there were numerous things that we needed to do, but we also needed to announce to the world that we were there, and then pause for a moment, and things were quiet, and we gazed out the window, and it was just a magnificent view, and that's the most impressive memory that I carry now because I refer back to it so many times.
I think perhaps the final descent to the lunar surface was, for me, the highlight of the flight. It was very challenging. There were a lot of unknowns, and it was, for a pilot, it was a wonderful experience.
There's so many things that can go wrong on a trip to the moon and back. It's sort of a long and fragile daisy chain of events, and I can remember being in the mobile quarantine facility, the little house trailer aboard the aircraft carrier after we landed in the Pacific, and thinking, gee, none of them did. None of those little links broke, and to me that was the amazing part, that everything worked in some as well as it did.
I think the most rewarding part of Apollo 11 was having it to be the major event in my life, which changed my life entirely and gave me an opportunity to reorder priorities and chart a course off for the future based on a new life of being a representative of the human race having done a very significant thing. And it's enabled me to deal with that in a way where I feel very confident about the future and my participation in helping to shape the future of the space program.
Well, every launch day is a time of excitement, enthusiasm, and apprehension. But I think in most circumstances, you always feel that the chances of actually lifting off are fairly distant or remote, and so you have to temper your enthusiasm with the realization that, in fact, you may be coming back in and trying to go another day.
I agree with Neil. It seemed to me that that time I was most interested in just getting that thing off. Above all, I did not want to recycle, to have to empty out those gigantic fuel tanks and try again a different day. I just desperately wanted to go on the 16th of July.
I think the momentous, most memorable thing that I can recall about that particular day was the opportunity while my two friends here were being put into the spacecraft to stand alone by myself out there and look at the rocket and the quietness and see the sun come up and the waves rolling in and the evidence of the millions of people watching, but nothing specific, and just so quiet, and to realize that indeed such a contrast was going to take place, all the frantic activity preparing the rocket, but it was so quiet up there for me personally, and that in a very few moments we were going to be departing in a great roar and off for a momentous event.
Well, I think the impressions of the moon started much earlier. On our approach, thousands of miles, as we got closer and closer, we could see more and more. As we got down into low orbit about the moon, we could see additionally more. We kept getting impressions. Then the final descent, you got closer, and after landing, of course, we were very close. We had hours to stand there a mere 15 feet, say, above the surface and look at pretty much everything that was available out the front windows. We had a sense of the gravity, the character of the environment there. So long before we actually got out on the surface, we already had pretty good appreciation for what the moon was like.
I agree with Neil. There are many different moons to remember. The one that we see from the Earth, the one that's en route, as we're sort of alone between the sun and the Earth and the moon. Then as we approach the moon, it's a different one. When you're in orbit, you look down on it, and it's a rather rough, lonesome, foreboding location. Neil had a much better view during the powered descent of that transition right down to the surface. I think I was relieved by the ease that we had in being able to maneuver around. Perhaps impressed by the talcum powder nature of the fine surface itself. As you'd look at a boot print, it just was so smooth, just like you'd put your foot in talcum powder. It was just a many-faceted moon. It was a stranger to me before the mission, but I now look back at it as somewhat of a friend, a place that I've visited.
Well, the thing about the moon that I thought was peculiar was that it seemed to depend on the angle of the sun. When the sun was almost overhead and it was noon down below, the moon appeared to be a warm and a friendly place. On the other hand, near dawn or dusk, it became very foreboding looking. The craters cast very long shadows, and the place looked distinctly unfriendly. So I was intrigued by the contrast based purely on what angle the sun happened to be coming from. Well, I enjoyed being in the command module by myself. It was a happy little home. All the machinery was working properly, and my concerns were not within the command module, but simply that something might go wrong with the LEM, with the lunar module, and these two guys might get stuck on the surface of the moon. That was my main concern.
Well, of course, all three of us had flown in orbit before and seen the wonders of Earth as seen from space. This was a new experience for us in seeing it from a fairly long distance away. It does probably have a change in character as you become farther away. I think you most notice that, though, at the time you leave Earth. When you're departing at a great rate, it's very clear that this is an unusual experience.
Well, the Earth, as it appears from the moon, is a very small and fragile object. And when you think about it, that's not an inaccurate description. Certainly, a lot of the things that we do down here can affect the balance in a very fragile way. The greenhouse effect we're noticing today, for example, the changes between a healthy atmosphere and an unhealthy atmosphere are very subtle, very, very fragile, and you sort of get that feeling when you look at the Earth from a great distance.
When we're on the surface of the moon, even though the Earth was only a slight 24 degrees off the vertical, there was no attraction on my part to divert my attention from where we were and what we were doing, to look up at it, except for the one time when we tried to take a a moving picture, or a stirring picture, a memorable picture. And it certainly, in retrospect, looked awfully small. Personally, there was a time when an ironic thought sort of filtered through my mind that here Neil and I were so far away from home, much further than people had ever been, and yet at that same time there were more thoughts, concerns back so far away on what it is that we were doing at that very moment. And I thought that was very unique in the history of mankind.
Of course, we did go back a number of times after our departure, and for a combination of reasons, that program was terminated in favor of other new initiatives. Do you think there's an increasing momentum to go back to the moon? There, studies of the moon are indicating more and more new reasons why it does make sense to go back, but I'm not in a position to say right now when we might make that next trip.
I'd prefer to see us go to Mars rather than go back to the moon, unless we need the moon as a stepping stone to Mars. It could be that in studying Mars, you will discover that the best way to do it is by way of a base on the moon, and if that turns out to be the case, well and good, but I see the moon really not as an end in itself, but really a stepping stone to deeper space, to Mars and to the planets beyond.
I look back on those days now of landing on the moon, and I try and put myself in the position of the historians, maybe even off into the future, that look back and see that it was an international challenge and response that prompted the president to chart a course for this nation to go there. And but getting to some specifics, I'm aghast that just almost exactly 6 years to the day after we left the Earth to go to the moon and land, we launched a mission that, in essence, gave the Soviets the ability to say that they're equal to us technically, and then we proceeded in the next 6 years not to even fly one human in space. And I think it's going to be inconceivable when future historians look back and see that what a tremendous capability was put together by one nation, and then it was sort of set aside and laid to rest. I hope that we don't do that in the future. I feel that as humans expand outward, that they should be in a gradual, continuous, self-sustaining way, and I suspect that it will involve visiting the moon simultaneously or in melding together with our growing visits of humans to Mars. I would expect to see them happening at about the same time, and we've used the moon where necessary to prove out things. I agree with Mike that the nation needs a strong goal, strong objective, and Mars is a much clearer one to use as our compelling drawing force into the future.
Well, there can be some very attractive cases made for going to Mars. Some of the various approaches to doing that in both manned and unmanned machines seem to be very persuasive to me. Well, I'm not surprised. I would have preferred that we would have already had a permanent presence in space. However, it takes 10 years or so to accomplish any big project these days, and I understand that now perhaps we'll have freedom up in the middle of the 90s, and I hope that's true. Well, I would advise them not to take my advice. It's a rapidly changing world. Science and technology evolve at a rapid pace. The things that my experience would dictate are 3 decades old and are probably not applicable today. But I am encouraged by the fact that there are so many people asking those questions, which seems to assure me that our future has a great deal of promise.
Well, I think a Martian astronaut would probably be better off studying the voyages of Vasco da Gama or Lewis and Clark rather than he would listening to 3 people who'd spent only 8 days out on the road. Round trip for a Mars mission is going to be in the vicinity of 2.5 years, and that's close in duration to those of the early explorers.
I think Mike's right. A trip to Mars is going to be a very long and involved and a major segment of a person's life, and there's going to be a lot of times to be thinking about it, discussing it en route, beforehand, and afterward. I don't know as our advice would be that pertinent to anyone at that time.
People who come here to this museum and look at our spacecraft Columbia are most often struck by its small size, which from their perspective is understandable. From our point of view, the command module was a wonderful improvement over our previous spacecraft, which were really cramped. And so we enjoyed the luxury of a big volume machine.
Yeah, I thought we had amazingly good accommodations. We had hot and cold water. The food was even edible. All in all, it was a nicely packaged small enclosure, and we could comfortably have stayed there far in excess of 8 days.
I think it was a treat. It was certainly a major step upward. It was a marvel of technology, and had the company of 2 enjoyable people to keep us occupied. Things occasionally would get to drag a little bit on, I think, in a very long duration mission inside the command and service module. But thanks to the experiences that we'd had previously in flight, we saw to it that there were adequate windows and quite a few of them to look out. I think that's a very key thing in the future, to provide good outside visibility for people.
In our simulations, we're accustomed to having a large number of these kinds of difficulties, and we had in fact simulated landing with very small amounts of fuel left. So I didn't feel that this was an oppressive situation. Not that we weren't concerned about it. We certainly were, because there were serious matters, but they were felt to be within our ability to make proper judgments on. I turn it over to Buzz.
Some simulations had indicated in missions beforehand that the ground controllers needed to know a little bit more about some alarms, so that the senior director had directed that a number of people do some research on it. So it was not perhaps as totally as much a surprise to them maybe as it was to us. I'd not been involved in a particular simulation where some computer alarms like that had come up. I think the major concern that we had was we felt we needed a confirmation as soon as possible from the ground, and the computer alarms did interrupt what both of us were doing, which was a systematic surveying for myself of the inside of the cockpit, and Neil was concentrating his attention on outside, and as soon as a computer alarm would go off and it would display something, he'd have to stop looking outside where he should be looking to to see what was happening, and then we'd have to get a response from the ground as to what the nature of that was, clear the display, and then be able to proceed on. So it became a bit of an interruption. I think the follow-on cruise certainly benefited tremendously by our coming marginally close in fuel, and I'm sure they had a much greater incentive to land with a more significant margin.
Well, actually, I didn't worry about it until after landing because I guess in my own view, we didn't have that good a chance of completing a successful landing. But it was, I did think about it between the time of landing and the time when we actually exited the spacecraft. Buzz and I did that.
Well, I think it certainly was. There was a lot of discussion before we went just how certainly we represented all of mankind. The plaque that we left on the surface of the moon indicated that here men from the planet Earth first set foot upon the moon. We came in peace for all mankind. But I think all of us were, with varying degrees of some service to our country that had been a major investment in our life, were most aware that this was a national response to perhaps an international challenge of our capabilities in engineering and technical prowess by the Soviets, and that we certainly were, in retrospect, responding, in a sense, and charting a course which was a national response. And because of the major events that took place as a result of the teamwork that we had between the government, academia, and industry, I've certainly felt that the American flag is what belonged there. It's characteristic of previous explorations to plant a symbol upon arriving at a new shore, and it indeed was a philosophical moment of achievement. It was also a technical challenge, as we found that the flag didn't exactly perform as we put it together, and it didn't stick in the ground exactly the way we thought it would. There was no breeze to wave it, so we had to maybe artificially create a little breeze. So it was a great mixture, but I think a sense of pride, and it will be a remembering event, photographing individuals alongside the flag.
Of course, it so happened that environmental awareness increased during the same period in history that space travel evolved, and there have been various efforts to correlate those two events. Certainly, the views from space have given all of humanity an increased appreciation and awareness of this planet.
The Earth does appear fragile from space. Part of it is simply it's so small. It's about the size of your thumbnail if you hold your arm out at full length, and it, of course, is absolutely spherical. Atmosphere is not apparent. It shines, it bounces the sunlight very well. So you have this very small, very shiny spherical object, and somehow it just appears to me, at least, extremely fragile. That would be the one most fundamental quality that it projects, is one of fragility. I don't know why, but it does.
I think it's nice to imagine that voyagers going out to land on another object would reflect back during the mission on how fragile the Earth was. I have to be honest with you, I was particularly concerned about what we were doing. It was a narrow corridor of that fragile body in the atmosphere that we had to aim for, and that would enable us to get back. I think after the fact, reflecting back, certainly technology and the advanced nature of society in using resources has caused us to become more sensitive, more concerned about our environment, because we're using things, materials, resources that tend to damage that. But I think the advancement of technology, as evidenced by the space program, holds with it also the keys to better monitoring of the rate of dangerous approach to any condition that is endangering our environment. And I think also it may be that space provides the means of alternate energy sources, or at least projecting energy from space back to the Earth, if indeed the production of energy right now through fossil fuels or through some other means, including nuclear generation, wants us to move away more from Earth in the production of energy. So I think the advancing technology, as evidenced by the space program, is evidence of our cause of concern about the atmosphere, but it also is our approach to the answers and the solutions of our environmental problems.
To me, the important thing is that we learned that human beings can operate successfully on the surface of another planet. We don't have to stay here on Earth. We have a choice of where we want to go and stay, either here on Earth or on the moon or beyond the moon on a place like Mars. I think that was to me, the fundamental lesson of Apollo. We can operate successfully in places other than the surface of the Earth.
Going to the moon certainly was the first expedition departing the Earth and viewing back on the Earth, and in its very simplistic initial challenges that it gave us ways of looking at other planets in the universe, and gave us a better perspective as to how to look back on our own planet and to make judgments as to its origin and perhaps some of the dangers that it might face in the future, and how to go about analyzing that. Certainly the moon had many contrasts. It's not a live tectonic body. It's a very dead object created by combinations of volcanism and meteorite impact. Rather than answering many questions, I think it raised many more questions, but certainly our level of understanding was immeasurably increased, and it's not for us necessarily to give the best appraisal of that.
I'm very reluctant to advise young people as to what to study. The requirements for space travel keep changing. They might want a test pilot one day, a physicist the next, a medical doctor the following Tuesday. I think what is important is that children do well in whatever field they choose. I think excellence is the key to it, and I think excellence is a lot more important than excellence in a particular field. Excellence in whatever field they feel suits them best.
Space and its frontiers certainly are new and challenging, and because they're new and challenging, they're also uncertain, and I think anyone aspiring that as a career field has to be equipped with a lot of patience and the ability to cope with things not turning out exactly the way they may perceive that they would ahead of time.